Hello, everybody. My name is Charles Baldessari, and I'm here alongside Joseph Arcopolo, Joseph Asher, and Mark Faina. We're here to present to you our project for MBA 544, which is COVID-19 impact on Coca-Cola supply chains. Thank you.
So this is the Coca-Cola supply chain, also known as the Coca-Cola system. The Coca-Cola company markets, manufactures, and sells beverage concentrates, beverage bases, and syrups. They also manufacture finished beverages, which include things like sparkling soft drinks, sports drinks, juices, some teas, and coffee. Finished products produced by the Coca-Cola company are sent directly to distributors who then forward those along to customers and consumers. The Coca-Cola company manufactures base syrups and sells it to bottling partners. The bottling partners then combine the concentrate with water and sweeteners as well as other ingredients to prepare, package, and distribute the final product. Coca-Cola has minority shares in some of the largest bottling partners, but fully independent bottlers produce almost half of the volume sold in the world. Independent bottlers also have the ability to sweeten the drinks based on local tastes. So, for example, in the US, they'll use corn syrup, in the EU, they'll use beet sugar, and in Asia, they'll use cane sugar. Once produced, the bottlers will then move those to the distributors, who then sell to customers and consumers. And as indicated here, there are approximately 225 bottling partners worldwide. In 2010, Melinda Gates spoke at a TED conference regarding what nonprofits can learn from Coca-Cola. And one of the points she made was that Coca-Cola taps into local entrepreneurial talent. So most companies control their own fleets, and they distribute the products on their own, or they'll rely on third parties. But sometimes there are just areas that it's impossible to get a truck, like a remote village in Africa. There are no real good roads for them to use. And so what Coca-Cola did was partnered with local entrepreneurs. They gave them a little bit of training, gave them a small loan, and set up what they called micro distribution centers. So essentially, the Coca-Cola company would sell to these local entrepreneurs. These entrepreneurs would then hire salespeople who then go out on bicycles, push carts, and wheelbarrows to sell the products. At the time of her speech, there were about 3,000 of these centers who employed about 15,000 people in Africa. And she joked that even in places where there's no electricity, you'll find Coca-Cola. And it's because of the way Coca-Cola has set up their supply chain. Because of this extensive network that Coca-Cola has established, local operations such as within Spain, the company can deliver within 24 hours to supermarkets. In larger scale operations such as within Europe, the Coca-Cola company can get drinks from factory to supermarket shelves within 48 hours.
Hello, everybody. My name is Charlie Baldessari, and I'm here to talk to you about our first discussion, which has to deal with how Coca-Cola supply chains have been disrupted with COVID-19, and yet they're still focusing on their sustainability throughout this pandemic, even when struggling with their supply chains. First of all, COVID-19 has not only affected the supply chain, but basically how Coca-Cola had to rethink how they would go forward maintaining their sustainability within the supply chains. Coca-Cola did this by actually increasing their share of sustainably sourced volumes from a mere 8% in 2013 to 54% in 2019, which is very impressive, especially going into the pandemic. Coca-Cola also has helped by focusing on their sustainability by engaging with the supplier needs, as those may have changed throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. What suppliers may have used to need is no longer going to be the same because of the new challenges they all face. Some of these ways Coca-Cola can help out their suppliers are by helping them with good financial teams, sharing information and best practices, simplification for supplier compliance during COVID-19. COVID-19 definitely jams up the systems and creates a lot of bottlenecks with all the new procedures and policies that, not just Coca-Cola, but many companies have in place. So simplification for supplier compliance is one of the biggest things that they were able to do, and also helps them maintain their sustainability. And lastly, Coca-Cola just really advocates for supplier business, because they need them just as much as the suppliers need Coke, so it's a two-way benefactor. They also advocate for food production, trade, and also the supply chains overall. Continuing on about COVID-19 and Coca-Cola's sustainability, it's been quite impactful because COVID-19 has made it pretty difficult to source sustainable ingredients for many of the supply chains. This has been due to harder ways for them to collect and transport raw materials. It's also been impacting distribution efforts depending on how many workers have fallen ill, potentially have to quarantine, depending on where they are and what the new rules and procedures are. So it's very disruptive for a large company that produces and sells in the quantities that Coca-Cola does. And also storage and warehousing has been an issue because, they're used to keeping X amount of inventory in a warehouse, and they may now be backed up in certain situations, or in some cases even falling behind, depending on where the needs are. So this is just another way that Coca-Cola has struggled throughout COVID-19, and, even doing so, they still try their best to keep up their sustainability efforts. Another thing that COVID-19 has had an impact on Coca-Cola with their supply chains is their IT department. IT is something that is becoming more and more prevalent every single year, especially with all the threats, whether that's phishing or fraudulent payments, trying to get wire transfers. So IT is definitely a huge focus, especially for supply chains among large corporations. IT helps them reduce their time on return to suppliers, and that's huge during COVID-19, especially if there's issues, because supply and demand, it's very hard for them to judge right now what the supply and demand is going to be in certain areas and certain regions, depending on, new policies, new procedures of transportation methods or routes they can go or can't go any longer. Also things like what stores can now stay open or are closed permanently. Store hours change often. The IT department also helps Coca-Cola throughout COVID-19 supply chain with superior technology, which really helped them aid logistics. And that's a huge effort. Very important with the amount of supply that they do have to sell, Warehouse automation is huge. That's helped them quite a bit during this pandemic, actually, just for the mere fact that you don't have to have as many workers in there, if any at all. So that really helps reduce the spread of contagion, if there is any at all. And I think that's been a big benefit to Coca-Cola throughout this pandemic. They also, going along with that, have storage and retrieval using automated systems in many situations, which is another great thing that they can do, so that there's less reduced risk of getting COVID-19 or spreading that amongst their workers, and still keeping their supply chain at the top-notch performance that they're able to provide to their customers. Lastly, Coca-Cola makes sure that, especially in their IT department, they stay on top of all the latest trends in supply chain management, specifically within their information technology departments, focusing mainly on cybersecurity. I know that's a huge one among many companies. It's very important that you can't have anyone get into your systems, so Cybersecurity is something that they make sure to stay on top of the latest trends and make sure their departments have all the latest training and know all of the most recent threats that other companies have faced in the modern day. All right, next off, I'd like to pass it along to my fellow group member.
Hi everyone, my name is Joseph Asher and I'll be discussing some of the ramifications of COVID-19 on Coca-Cola's supply chains and their overall business performance throughout this past year. So one of the major impacts that COVID has had on Coca-Cola's supply chain has been their ability to predict consumer buying habits and demand uncertainty. They've typically used time series forecasting, which relies on historical data from their sales and demand uncertainty. So in this new COVID environment, there's really no precedent to work off of, so they're kind of flying blind with their predictions for uncertainty and demand. And we've seen a lot of decrease in demand due to several virus-related shutdowns in some of their key consumer bases and industries that they distribute to. We've seen restaurants be shut down for a while, and even when they've reopened, we've seen their capacity limited. Same applies to movie theaters. They were closed for a while. Now they're open, but they're not serving as many people. Sporting events were canceled for a while, and even since now when they've come back, there's no fans, so they're not selling concessions at these big events. Same thing with concerts that are held in like sporting venues. They're not really happening anymore. So this big decline in what they categorize as away from home consumption, and this away from home consumption contributes to over 50% of Coca-Cola's revenue. So this decline in this category has really represented the biggest impact on their demand, with over 25% decline in global volume since April. So although this away from home consumption has really taken a big hit in this COVID environment, there have been some markets that have increased their demand throughout this time. We've seen supermarkets see heightened demand as people are trying to stockpile products to prepare for future shutdowns and stay-at-home orders, so they're trying to load up before they run out in the supermarkets. Even before COVID, we've seen e-commerce channels become increasingly popular within Coca-Cola when they're trying to reach out to new markets. And now with some people not feeling comfortable going out to markets, these e-commerce channels are becoming really a lot more valuable for Coca-Cola to invest in. And they've seen a really increase in demand during these times. One of the biggest impacts of COVID-19 on Coca-Cola's supply chains has been its effects on its production facilities. They've had to adapt their operations to prioritize employee safety within their facilities. This has included implementing new cleaning and sanitation routines with a higher focus on high contact surfaces within the facility. This includes a lot of the machinery and equipment they use for, say, bottling and production. This includes their conveyor belts that they use to ship out their products. So these surfaces that have a lot of contact between different employees, this has been the main focus of their sanitation routines in order to help minimize any potential spread between workers. These plants have adopted split shift schedules, so that means that one group of workers comes in for a block of hours, then leaves for a little bit, and an entire new shift comes in for a few hours, then they leave and the original shift comes back. And this has helped to minimize contact between workers. They've placed new restrictions and limitations on visitors entering their facilities, so outside vendors and other business partners that they've typically allowed to enter the facility, they've been limiting. So they've kind of been creating their own little bubble environment within the Coca-Cola production facilities. There's been an increased focus within production on products that are seeing heightened demand within the at-home supply channels. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, the away-from-home consumption for Coca-Cola has taken the biggest hit during this year. But a lot of their at-home channels there is what they're trying to focus on now, which are experiencing more demand. So this is their bottled water, their various soft drinks and sport drinks. So they've been trying to focus on that within their production plants. And despite all these different changes and adjustments to their facilities, a lot of the production plants, whether it's their concentrate plants where they put their formula together from raw ingredients or their bottling plants, they've still managed to remain in business during the past 9 months or so. So that's an encouraging sign for Coca-Cola during these times. Coca-Cola's sourcing is another aspect of the supply chain that's been impacted by COVID. So since Coke's a very global company, there's been some troubles transporting their ingredients used in their concentrate and the materials that they use for the bottling process across various borders. So In North America, let's say between the U.S. and Canada, there's been some issues, or the U.S. and Mexico, so delivery drivers may have to change at these borders depending on the country's health and safety protocols. So that's resulted in some shipping delays. But one of the advantages that Coke has in its supply chain is that once it actually does enter the country, whether it be the United States or like Canada, it's that they have supply chains locally that once it enters the country, they produce it within that country, they distribute within that country, so they stay within that one area. They're not shipping it across. They're not making it in the U.S. and then shipping it off and selling it in Mexico. If it's made in the U.S., they're going to sell it in the U.S. If it's made in Canada, let's say it's going to be sold in Canada. So that, despite these difficulties in transporting like raw materials and ingredients between borders, once it gets into the actual country, with the local supply chains has actually served as an advantage for Coca-Cola. Another issue they've seen that a lot of soft drink industries and beverage industries have seen as an issue during COVID has been carbon dioxide shortages, and that's due to bioethanol raw gas depletion. But Coke has developed contingency plans so that this issue isn't really going to impact their overall supply chain effectiveness and their sourcing process. So they've had backup plans and inventory and other contingency options that they've been able to prevent this issue that a lot of other beverage companies have come across over the past few months. But their ability to think ahead and have contingency plans really hasn't had this issue on their supply chain. So the financial impact of COVID on Coca-Cola, like many industries, was pretty massive. Coming into 2020, Coca-Cola originally predicted organic revenue growth of about 5%, and they expected their earnings per share to increase by about 7% to $2.25. As of this week, Coca-Cola's current market capitalization of their stock is about $223 billion, but that figure dropped by as much as 23% to around $180 billion in late March due to revenue loss and their poor operating results that occurred from the loss of on-premise sales. This is similar to what I mentioned in an earlier slide with the away-from-home consumption, so these two things are pretty similar. So this away-from-home consumption and on-premise sales decrease was due to the various virus-related shutdowns, like I mentioned before, with the restaurant industry, movie theaters, sporting events, things like that. So the loss of those sales, which make up a really large portion of Coca-Cola's market share, that really kind of tanked them in late March when the panic about the virus was really first starting and was pretty rampant. In their most recently reported quarter, their revenue generation dropped by a little over 8%. But despite these losses, over the past year or so, Coca-Cola's stock price has kind of rebounded pretty close to the pre-pandemic levels. It's around $52 right now. If you look to the figure on the right side of the slide, you could kind of see how volatile it's been this year, how it started off pretty stable around $55, but then tanked really low to about as low as $37 in late March when, like I just said, the fears about the virus were really just starting and were really at an all-time high. But it's really, over the past couple months, it's kind of been a little more stable. It's rebounded a bit. They're in the low 50s. So this has mainly been due to Coca-Cola is just such a global, popular brand. Its brand recognition around the world is massive. The reputation of its product is very well known at this point. It's been around for quite a while at this point, and they have a vast distribution network around the world. So there's really all these factors of its popularity and people just recognizing it and knowing that it's a quality product have served to help and stabilize their stock during these times that are really uneven, but they've been able to overcome that with the quality of their product and rebound despite all these challenges.
Coke moving forward. In order to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic safely and successfully, Coca-Cola plans to continue to focus on the health and the safety of its employees. It will do this by working with the government at all levels, state, local, and federal, in order to continue operating safely for its employees and the people and companies that they serve. They will also continue to practice additional cleaning and sanitizing routines, prioritizing high-touch surfaces and other high-risk areas. The next steps for Coca-Cola. First, they plan to remain flexible with procedure, meaning that they can shut down any plants if they need to if an outbreak occurs, and have people work at home if they can. They will also continue to practice social distancing within their facilities. They will also stay aware of lockdowns in certain parts of the world, so that way they are always abiding by the law in the region that they're operating in. They will also use this time to their advantage and make room to innovate. They plan to do this by getting rid of some of their older products to make room for new ones. Some of the older products being discontinued are Tab Soda, Odwalla, and Diet Coke Fierce Cherry. In with the new. Coke hopes that several new products will lead the way out of the COVID-19 pandemic. They hope that these new products will breathe new life into the company and expand their products to untapped markets. Some of those new products include AHA flavored seltzer, Topo Chico, spiked seltzer, and Coca-Cola Energy. In the near future, Coke also plans to discontinue some of its older products in order to make room for newer ones. They saw this time as an opportunity to grow and to find new customers.
So here are all the articles and news sources we cited throughout the presentation to find our information. So thank you to everyone for listening and watching, and hope you took something away from this, and thanks again.